There exists a threat, from anti-hunting groups to politicians trying to give our land away, and we won't stand for it. Those vast western landscapes provide the space for our wildlife to thrive and a place for hunters and anglers to fuel the fire that sparks their soul. In this show, we share our love of hunting, fishing, and conservation. Here, we provide the foundation to meet these threats through passion and the grit of the American outdoorsman. Welcome to the Western Huntsman Podcast. Canadian gray wolf, the arch nemesis of the Rocky Mountain elk. This occurs in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, and it's a problem. And we're going to talk about that problem today on this episode. Welcome to episode 4 of the Western Huntsman Podcast. My name is Jim Huntsman. I'm glad you guys are here. Thanks for tuning in. This episode is all about wolves, the issue that they create, what you could do about it, and how we're going to get together, we're going to band together and unite and create solutions to this problem that we all suffer from. And buckle up, Colorado, because it's on the ballot for you guys this coming year. You have got to do something to prevent this vote from being approved from these pro-wolf organizations. Otherwise, you're going to spend years in litigation while these wolf populations grow and they savage your elk herds. And not to mention, the mule deer herds, the whitetail herds, the moose, everything suffers. And I'm telling you right now, my audience is mainly Western hunters, right? And those are my peeps. Well, I'm a Western hunter. These are my people. In the state of Idaho, I'm gonna put this into perspective from the state of Idaho. Because of the wolf, we are suffering on our elk herds, our moose herds, our deer herds. Wolves, out of check and out of balance, do not balance the ecosystem like some of these pro-wolf organizations will try to lie to you and tell you. They do not balance the ecosystem without management. Nobody wants to eliminate wolves at a level of complete annihilation. Nobody's saying that. What needs to happen is management, sound management, effective management, and a mass reduction in the current population of wolves. And here's why. In 1995, the federal government brought in the first group of wolves into central Idaho. And then in 1996, they released another group. The objective for these wolves, to get them off the endangered species list and allow state management in the state of Idaho, was about 150 wolves and 10 breeding pair. Now, wolves, on average, kill 20 elk per year, each wolf. So that equates to about 3,000 dead elk every year at that management objective. So now here we are. We went through this 10-year span after they reached the objective in about 1998 or 99. I can't remember exactly. Once that objective was reached, we went through this 10-year time span of constant litigation from these pro-wolf organizations who make a lot of profitable revenue off of these litigation and lawsuits, trying to keep these wolves on the endangered species list. And we explained this in this episode with Justin Webb. So now we're trying to catch up, right? In 2011, the Foundation for Wildlife Management started, and people were able to start trapping and hunting and going after these wolves. And the assumption was, both from state agencies and the pro-wolf organizations out there, and some of this information you can look it up in the Idaho Wolf Conservation and Management Plan. They had a couple of assumptions. The first one being that once they released it to state management and opened up a season for trapping and hunting wolves, that hunters and trappers were going to absolutely decimate the wolf packs. This has proven to be not true. Another big assumption that was made in the beginning, and I'm not here to accuse anybody of being right or wrong in this stance, but the belief was that the wolves were going to mainly feed, their diet was going to be mainly mule deer and whitetail deer, and less elk. Well, it turns out, after all these years, it's about 89%, 90% wolf or elk. I should take a little break here and just tell you, my wife and I were listening to some of these as I edit these. We're talking about maybe doing some blooper episodes, because I make some wild ones. You guys have no idea what I end up editing out. And anyways, getting back to it. So these assumptions that were made, and again, not accusing anybody right or wrong, but they were wrong. And the difficulty level of hunting and trapping these wolves is a lot higher than what was originally anticipated. So now it's 2020. We've got north of 1,000 wolves in the state of Idaho and over 100 breeding pairs. And the other assumption, by the way, was that in a pack there's only going to be one alpha male and one alpha female, and they would only breed together, and that was it. That is also a false analysis or I guess assumption, if you will. That's not what happens. They know now that the alpha male will breed multiple female wolves. So now we've got 1,000 wolves and over 100 breeding pairs. Based on those numbers I told you before, that equates to about 20,000 dead elk annually just on the wolf direct predation on elk. Okay, that's not there's another aspect to that. Wolves kill elk in a lot of different ways. They run them to death. They do what is called surplus killings, where they are never cut. The wolves do not return and actually consume these elk. They leave them. The running of these elk and displaced habitat for the elk because the wolves are chasing them out of the backcountry stresses the cows out. You get a lot of aborted fetuses and also failed attempts during the rut for these cows to actually get bred. That's a lot of loss just in that point there. There's also a lot of depredation kills because the elk are moving into agricultural areas and eating alfalfa and tearing up fences and fields, and farmers and ranchers need to protect their investment and their livelihood, and I don't blame them. So those of you that get real bent out of shape when these ranchers request these depredation tags to shoot these elk, well, hell, that's how they make their living. One lost cow is a lot of money. This is an industry that cannot afford money lost. They don't make enough money to account for this kind of loss. Another way that wolves kill elk is through displaced elk running from the backcountry down into the valleys and into the developed areas and getting hit on the highways. Their migration patterns are off. They're being displaced from areas where they know that the nutrients are rich in their feed, and they no longer are able to stay there because the wolves are onto them. So if you add that up since about 2011, we're just going to go from 2011, there's approximately 746 wolves in the state of Idaho, and now we're north of 1,000 wolves, and sometimes those numbers are going to be higher than others. That equates to somewhere between 170,000 and 200,000 dead elks, dead elk as a direct result to wolves. So to those of you who think that, wolves aren't that big of a deal, they're not that big of a problem because you're in southern Idaho, or you're hunting elk in Utah and aren't affected, or you're hunting elk in Arizona or Colorado, where elk are not affected by these wolves. This is a reality for us, and it's spreading. Nobody reintroduced wolves to Washington and Oregon, but because of the population growth in the state of Idaho, they're moving over there. And now they've got a wolf problem to deal with. Here's another way to look at it. Here's another perspective and some statistical data for you. In Idaho, we have units 10 and 12. It's called the Lolo Hunting Unit. In 1989, the estimated elk population was more than 16,000 elk. Now, in 2018, 2 years ago, at best, the estimate is about 1,000 elk. 16,000 elk down to 1,000 elk. They also have and provide harvest statistics from those years. 1989, in the Lolo unit, 1,975 elk were harvested. In 2018, only 146 elk were harvested. Guys, do the number, do the math on that. It's a ghost town up there. Our backcountry is becoming this desolate wasteland. And what happens is, and again, on this point, we explain this in more detail when I sit down with Justin Webb. But what happens is when wolves are not managed or they are very difficult to manage, you don't have a balanced ecosystem. The wolves kill all the elk, and then there's nothing for the wolves to feed on. So then they suffer. So where's the balance? There is no balance. There's no balance in that, and that's a proven fact based on what happened in Yellowstone National Park. You can see that. The wolves are now sick and diseased and moving out of the park. They've killed all the elk within the park. You don't even see the elk there, very rarely anymore. And so that's these kind of things I bring them up because I want everybody to understand, no matter what side of this you're on, that this is an issue that has to be dealt with, and it has to be dealt with right now. So, in this episode, I sit down with Justin Webb. Justin Webb is extremely smart and very keyed in on this wolf issue. He is the executive director for the Foundation for Wildlife Management. He's a very successful wolf trapper. He's grown up in Idaho, and he's got a great track record with his hunting background and his trapping background. He's extremely effective. He's very articulate, and he knows this wolf problem like the back of his hand. He's probably one of the best guys in the country to sit down and discuss this with, because he's not just got a pulse on this. He's got a very good and positive perspective as to how to balance this and how to manage these wolves in a way that we're not losing tempers. We're explaining it the right, most effective way to people that are maybe on the fence with being pro-wolf or wanting to manage them better. He's just got a great perspective on this, and he's very articulate about it. So I'm excited for you guys to hear this. And within this, I offer the Foundation for Wildlife Management a free sponsorship on this podcast. And what I'm going to do is, if you guys get on there, within the show notes, it's going to be linked to the website for the Foundation of Wildlife Management. If you click on there and pay your $35 and sign up, at the bottom of the page where you're signing up, it's going to ask you where you heard about the Foundation for Wildlife Management. If you put in the Western Huntsman Podcast, within that line, you will be automatically entered to win a Maverick reed and a Phelps game tube. And I chose that because archery hunting for elk, calling, bugling elk, that's my passion. And so I think that those, it's not trying to take away from rifle hunters, because you guys can use these calls too. That's and also it's just what I've got. I don't have some huge budget to go out and do something bigger in terms of a giveaway. So, and it's a cool giveaway. You guys, if you're using this Phelps stuff, it's a good tool to have in the field. And so I'm going to give away one reed and one bugle tube to somebody from that types in that they heard of the Foundation for Wildlife Management on the Western Huntsman Podcast, and I'm running that until April 4th. It's $35, and that money goes directly into the pockets of guys that are out there committed to managing these wolves. It's not going to, places that you don't know or out of state or out of the country or anything like that. This is a local organization, and if you live in Idaho and hunt in Idaho, or you live in Oklahoma and you come to Idaho to hunt elk, or if you live anywhere in the Midwest or the East Coast, anytime if you hunt in Idaho, resident or non-resident, this organization is worth the $35, and I encourage you guys to get on there and buy yourself a membership, because it's an actual effective way to manage these wolves. If you are a member of the Foundation for Wildlife Management and you head out to the woods, and let's say you're hunting elk and you come across a wolf and you put a wolf down and you've got a wolf tag in your pocket, you could submit receipts and get reimbursed for that wolf, up to $1,000 depending on where you're at. It's going to range from $500 to $1,000. So that's what it goes towards. So for those of us that don't have the time and the commitment and the skill set to go out and either hunt or trap these wolves, this is a way that we could help those that do, and in the end, that helps all of us. It helps our ecological systems in the West. It helps our elk. It helps our hunters. It helps everybody down to the wildlife photographers. So get on there and get your membership. Type in the westernhuntsman.com, the Western Huntsman Podcast, and get that membership and be entered into the drawing to win that bugle tube. So there you go, guys. I'm going to get into this with Justin Webb, Foundation for Wildlife Management. Let's do something about these wolves. Thanks for listening. everybody. This is episode 4. Today I've got Justin Webb with the Foundation for Wildlife Management on today. I'm pretty excited about this interview because, as I discussed in the introduction, this is probably the most important issue facing not just Idaho hunters, but Western hunters in general, especially with everything coming up with the vote in Colorado coming up this year. So, again, Justin Webb, I've got him on. How you doing?
I'm good, Jim. Thanks for having me here.
I really appreciate you coming on. Like I said, this is an important episode for me. I think that anybody, especially because we're in North Idaho, I feel like there's this huge impact that wolves have on us and all across Idaho and the state. And I think the Foundation for Wildlife Management is the one foundation and the one group out there that's actually stepping up and doing something about it. And so I'm super excited about this episode. Let's maybe kick off with your background. Where you're from? Tell us a little bit about your family, some background. Give us a little history on Justin Webb.
Well, Justin Webb. I grew up in a little cabin off the grid in North Idaho, about 30 minutes north of Sandpoint. When I was young, didn't have any running water or electricity or anything. Learned young what hard work was and what was important in life as far as family and relationships and the value of hard-earned meal put on the table.
Yeah.
Firewood in the woodshed, that sort of thing. Grew up in Sandpoint thinking that I was going to leave town and make $1 million, and I grew up and left town and realized that I'd much rather be at home and broke than living in the city and have $1 million. So
I don't have $1 million either, buddy.
Yeah, I hear you. So I came back home and you know, it takes a certain personality type, I think, to scratch out a good living in North Idaho, and you got to be diversified and understand the value of getting by on little and appreciating what you have.
So no kidding, no running water when you were growing up, huh?
No.
So did you guys have a well or something on the property?
We actually packed water in and out. I remember some of the first bathing periods in the springtime. My dad would wade us out into the middle of Pack River with ice cold water flowing down the river, and he'd wade out there somehow. I don't know how he managed to stay in the water that long himself, but he would wade us out there with us kicking and screaming and yelling and duck us under the water and pick us up and scrub us down and dunk us again, and then he'd turn us loose and we'd scurry off to the bank. And
in the springtime,
and I just looking at it then, I just remember how miserable I was. I never thought about what he was going through. I could not imagine wading out into Pack River in the middle of the spring runoff to bathe your children. But anyhow, It was a different experience. I saw a meme on Facebook this morning. A guy posted a picture of an outhouse, and it's got the toilet paper roll, and it's all covered in frost. Oh. And it just brought back memories to being young and mom and dad telling us kids that it was our job to go out and warm up the toilet seat first thing in the morning.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that story.
Fun stuff.
Oh, that's great. And to put it into perspective, guys, if you're not familiar with the Pack River in North Idaho, we're talking like Arctic cold water coming down in the spring. It's not pleasant at all. And so now you're married with kids and living in the Sandpoint area. Do you have running water now?
Yeah, most definitely.
Well, that's good. Tell me about your earliest hunting memory. I'm always intrigued with people's earliest hunting memory.
I was thinking about that question earlier today, and I'm not real sure that I can recall one specific memory. I do remember how proud my mom was of me the first time I shot a grouse with my BB gun and brought it home for dinner. My family always made a big deal of that. If you're doing a man's job and providing for the family, you've accomplished something, and nothing ever went to waste, and it was always used. And so the value of scratching out a living on the mountain, I think, was different than living in town. And I always, still to this day, I am so thankful for having that background and learning to appreciate the things that I have now based on having had little in the past and growing up that way. And I remember every year voting as a family as to whether we would move to town and live like everybody else or whether we would stay in our cabin on the mountain. And as hard as it was packing water in for a mile in the middle of winter with 4 or 5 feet of snow, we always voted to stay on the mountain. And
Wow.
and it's pretty powerful. And I really wish that every young kid got to experience that.
Me too. I think society would be better if
I
that
agree.
were the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great story. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
So that's a great story. I appreciate you sharing that. And nowadays, what all do you hunt?
That's a good question. I don't know that there's a whole lot that I don't hunt.
The list is shorter on the don't hunt, right?
Yeah, I mean, as far as what we have to offer here in North Idaho, I know that when I was a teenager, I had kind of set a goal for myself to have, before my hunting career is over, what I consider personally a trophy of each of the 10 big game animals. Back then it was 9 that Idaho has to offer on my wall as a representation of my hunting career before I physically can't hunt the way that I enjoy hunting,
Sure.
being in the backcountry. And I've been really blessed in my hunting career. Deer, elk, bear. I mean, obviously those are the big 3 for North Idaho, but
Sure.
even targeting wolves, I've been fairly blessed there as well. That's one of the things that really intrigued me the past few years, and it's kind of taken over my passion for hunting is targeting wolves. I spend far more time doing that now than what I do elk hunting, which was and always had been one of my greatest passions. I really love hunting big muley bucks in the high country. Mm-hmm. There's nothing better than getting a bull elk screaming, during the peak of the rut. Archery hunting for elk is another of my favorites. Whitetail have consistently beat me. I've been really blessed, and I've taken some really great bucks, but I've always kind of told myself that when I am old enough that I can't hike the way that I do currently, that I will force myself to sit in a tree stand. And
Yeah.
I believe that that's the way that a guy needs to hunt North Idaho and our timbered country to be able to successfully harvest a truly mature whitetail buck on a consistent basis.
It's
And
so hard to sit that long though.
it is. I struggle so bad.
Me too.
I had some great ground scouted out here a few years back, and nobody else was hunting in there. Had some tree stands set up, and I had some legitimate monster bucks patterned on camera. And I'd get in my tree stand, and it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and it gets daylight about 6:30, and I'm telling myself, just 10 more minutes, just sit here, just 10 more minutes. And by 8:30, I can't take it anymore. I got to climb down. I'm just one of those what's over the next ridge kind of guys. It's really hard for me to sit still.
I knew we were going to get along because I'm the same way.
Yeah. It's tough for me, but one day I'll make it work. I have taken some really great whitetails just by chance, spot and stalk style hunting or just quietly moving through the woods. But pretty passionate about mule deer hunting. I've been really blessed and taken some really nice muley bucks for what North Idaho has to offer. I've had people challenge me and say, "Oh gosh, you should go hunt in Colorado or Utah or Arizona or something." And there's just something about getting it done at home in my own backyard,
Sure.
in the timbered, rugged country that we have here that just makes it all that much more meaningful to me. And so I've really never traveled to hunt much.
Yeah. Well, and I could tell you, I grew up. I've hunted in Utah for muleys quite a bit, and there's no difference really in size. They're a lot harder to find here.
Yeah.
Like Utah just has all this open country, and you could just sit in glass all day and find a plethora of bucks. They've changed the seasons down there to a point where it's harder to do that. But anyway, and you guys, the listeners, Justin's being super humble when he talks about how he's just kind of been blessed with wolves. And his success has been, he's probably one of the most prolific trappers, most successful guys I watch, because I follow you on social media, and you've gotten some huge wolves, and you've gotten a few this year, haven't you?
I have, yeah. I think I'm at 7.
7 wolves
this year, yeah.
Wow. Well, it's kind of like one of those things from an elk hunter standpoint. I want to thank you for your service. Because
well, it means a lot to me. I can't express to you what goes into targeting wolves, at least what it takes me to target wolves successfully. Mm-hmm. And I do feel blessed in my accomplishments. But I can tell you, being the executive director for the Foundation for Wildlife Management, I talk to people on a regular basis who are really good at this, and I'm not good at this. We've got members that tagged out with 20 wolves in just over 40 days.
That's insane.
We've got members that are responsible for having trapped, pushing 100 wolves total since we've started our trapping seasons. And these guys started from scratch. These weren't guys who had been to other places and trapped wolves elsewhere. They learned from scratch, and they got it figured out.
Wow. I'd buy you guys a beer anytime. Anytime. I want to talk about how you mentioned being the executive director for Foundation for Wildlife Management. And for people that don't know, just a kind of an overview real quick. Foundation for Wildlife Management is an organization that is set up to reimburse the costs of successful hunters and trappers for wolves, particularly, right?
Yep.
Is there any other mission of the foundation, or is that the sole purpose?
So when people ask me what we do, I tell them we bring those that want wolves managed together with those who have the ways and means to get the job done.
That's fantastic. Go ahead.
And that's kind of the concept. It was born out of necessity. When we first got our trapping season, this small, passionate group of elk hunters from Sandpoint, Idaho, really believed that we were all going to go out and target wolves, and we were going to take care of our wolf problem that we had. We've been watching, finding moose that had been hamstrung and left suffering in the ditch and off the snowmobile trails. We'd been seeing our elk pushed out of the backcountry and down into the farmland, and we were mad. And we really truly believed that when we got our hunting and trapping seasons for wolves, that we were going to go out there and target wolves, and we were going to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And all of those folks that were in that group went out and tried to harvest wolves, and not a single person was successful. Yeah. And combined, there were thousands of dollars spent attempting to do so. And so the process kind of came about. It's kind of somewhat of a long story, but long story short, they called somebody who was a professional trapper. He trapped bobcats and marten through the winter, and that's how he paid his bills. And they thought, we need to get this guy to teach us how to trap, and we'll be able to solve the problem. So they bought him lunch and sat him down and said, we'd like to have you teach us how to trap wolves. And he said, I don't trap wolves. And they said, well, wait a minute, you hunt elk? He said, well, sure I hunt elk. Live in North Idaho. That's what we do here. And one of the guys says, well, so you're telling us you're the only one we know that knows how to get this done, and you're not going to do it? And he said, you don't get it. He said, I feed my family. I pay my bills. I keep the lights on at my house by trapping. Wow. He said, wolf trapping is going to cost you so much money, you won't be able to do it.
And why does it cost so much money?
Well, that's a complex question. Glad to delve into that.
Well, I tell you what, let's circle back to that in a little bit, because let's get back into kind of how you got involved with Foundation for Wildlife Management. But I do want to circle back to that, because that's going to be one of the purposes. Maybe I didn't describe that to the listeners at the beginning. The idea with this episode, guys, is I want all the listeners to have a really solid understanding of the magnitude of the wolf issue in the state of Idaho and the American West throughout. And if you're interested in getting involved in making a difference, whether you're buying a membership with the Foundation for Wildlife Management or getting into trapping, I want everybody to kind of have a platform to start from, right, at the end of this podcast. And that's kind of the goal. Fair enough?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So before we move on, I do want to finish explaining how the program got started. So through that conversation, they asked that gentleman, what would it take to get you to target wolves? And he said, for $500, I could at least set some gear out while I'm running my other trap lines in hopes of finding success. Mm-hmm. And so because those guys were saying, we spent $3,000, we spent $3,500, we spent $2,500 this year, and we didn't remove a single wolf. We should have given you all this money and had you go remove wolves from the areas that we hunt in. And so through that conversation, the concept of collecting funding to support the guys that know how to get it done kind of came about, and it's just kind of grown from there. And now that's why we say we bring those who want wolves managed together with those who have the ways and means of getting the job done, because there's very few people who are very successful on a regular basis. Our hunting success rate for wolves is less than 0.25%. Yep. Trapping success rate is 37%, and that's the importance of trapping.
It's such a big difference too. I mean, I've tried to hunt wolves. I've never tried to trap them, but I've tried to hunt them. I've bought the wolf howlers and covered country, and I don't even see. The only time I've ever actually had wolves respond was when I was elk hunting. They responded to a cow call, and I still didn't even see them. I just heard them. They howled at me, and so you're so right in that when wolves were reintroduced, the idea that when they were left or brought off the Endangered Species Act, I'm starting to stutter here, the hunters were going to go out in mass and just kill all the wolves and blah, blah, blah. And it was this big concern, right? It's even in this, I printed off the Idaho Wolf Conservation and Management Plan. It's even in there. It's a concern. Their big concern is overlay management. And it's just so not true because they're so difficult to hunt. So the trapping part intrigues me like crazy. I'm pretty excited about that part. So there you are. You guys started the group. And it's this core group of mainly trappers that want to actually make a difference. Am I right?
I would disagree. It was a core group of passionate elk hunters who wanted to make a difference, who were seeking help from trappers because that was the only thing they could think of that may be successful because all of their efforts had been futile. Gotcha. We had removed no wolves and we had spent a ton of money and we needed some help. And so we were seeking those who knew how to trap, hoping that they would help us. And they said the only way they could afford to do so was if they had financial backing.
And is that where the idea of the reimbursement program? And I do want to make something very, very clear to the listeners. This is not a bounty on wolves. You have to provide receipts, and it's a reimbursement on a successful wolf kill, whether it's hunted or trapped.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's the only group that I know of. Is there something like this in Montana?
There's not. So we actually there had been in the past, but we tried to expand into Montana for 3 years. They presented us, Montana FWP presented us with legislation which deems what we do illegal within the state of Montana.
No kidding.
And so for the last couple of years, they've been working to try to change that. This last year, Senator Bob Brown ran a bill, and it was shot down, I think, by 3 votes in the Senate. Was all, but I know that their legislative sessions are every other year rather than every year, and I know that they're already working for some things for next year, trying to get that accomplished.
2021 is their next legislative session. Gotcha. So what about Wyoming?
So we've not delved into having the program in Wyoming yet. If there is interest there and people want to start a chapter there, I could see this program being needed in all states that end up with a wolf management program.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. You guys are the ones that can actually provide hard data, and we're going to get into that on what the effect of the foundation is. And walk us through what an executive director does for the foundation.
That's a really big question, and I actually I've been asked that before, and I've had to really look through what that entails. You know, one of the things in building this foundation that we've tried to do is look at who is successful and how do they operate. So we started looking at mainly the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. You know, there's Ducks Unlimited, Wild Turkey Federation. There's all these different nonprofit wildlife organizations that have been very successful. And for those that don't know, most nonprofit organizations collapse within their first 2 years. And it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy task to start a nonprofit and have it be successful, especially in regards to wildlife for some instances. So all of the positions within F4WM have been created based on looking at those who are successful and trying to mimic what they do. That's the main reason that we chose banquets as kind of a business model for creating funding and recruiting memberships and everything. Is that's what the guys who are successful do. A banquet generates membership. Mm-hmm. It generates funding. It creates a huge reminder for everyone to renew their membership every year. And it's just the most productive business model that's out there right now. So the executive director position for the Foundation for Wildlife Management has kind of transpired over several years of creating a position and altering it as needs required. So a few of the items that I do, I attend all the Idaho Fish and Game Commission meetings. I'm responsible for all event planning, all promotion of F4WM. I work at the pleasure of the volunteer board of directors. That's we have 9 people on our board. I answer all the phone calls. If you go to our website and you phone in, it goes directly to my cell phone. I answer all the emails. Our secretary, Teresa Stevens, is just a godsend to me in assistance with emails and membership processing and those things. But the majority of phone calls are directed to me. All inquiries about the program. I plan educational events, trying to assist our members in understanding the best methods of targeting wolves.
Can I stop you right? Can you describe what an educational event is?
Sure. So we actually, there's been a few different times where we have paid professional trappers to come down from Canada or Alaska to help educate our membership. Wolves are extremely smart. They learn extremely quickly. And if you attempt to target wolves, not knowing what you're doing, odds are you're going to educate them faster than you can catch them.
Yeah.
And same thing with hunting. I think that when we first got our seasons, we made a lot of mistakes, and it made our job a whole lot more difficult. But that's one of the things a lot of people don't understand, is that there was no one here that was familiar with managing wolves, including the professionals, our state game agency. So that's one of the things that we've worked hard to do as we have obtained membership, members who have figured out how to get things done productively. We've tried to encourage those folks to share that information with everybody else. That's one thing with wolves. I've found that it brings people together, and we've worked really hard to unite different sportsmen's groups. But when you start talking about deer or elk hunting and you ask somebody about their deer or elk tactics or locations or anything to do with their success, oftentimes you get a very generic answer and everybody's closed-lipped. When it comes to wolves, we're all affected negatively by this issue. And so everyone is the majority, I shouldn't say everyone, the majority of people are extremely excited to share what they've learned. And it's new to all of us. Yeah. So we all had to learn from scratch. So when I say educational opportunities there, so I'll give you an example. This last year we worked with the Idaho Trappers Association, the Intermountain Fur Harvesters, the Upper Snake River Trappers, and we put on a united trapping rendezvous over here in Rathdrum, and it was great. We ended up with 3 days of every hour and a half we had a different trapping educational demo or seminar taking place in each of 2 different locations. And so we ended up with about a dozen wolf trapping seminars, and we actually videoed all that, and we're trying to get that produced now so that we can share it with our membership as well.
I'm really bummed I missed that.
It was, I'll tell you, I've got some guys that are trapping this year. Some great members. They've been a huge support to us, and they had caught wolves in the past. But they came to that event. It was a 3-day event, and they went out, and I think they're at 16 or 17 wolves right now for the season, and they really got a lot out of it, as did many folks. So
that's fantastic.
We're just trying to do everything that we can to make it easier for people to be able to manage wolves, and it doesn't stop at that. I mean, I mentioned attending all the Fish and Game Commission meetings. This last year we opened up, I think it was 43 new trapping units. We doubled our number of tags available from 10 to 20. Mm-hmm. We pushed back our foot trapping seasons from November 15th to October 10th, basically added 5 weeks during the peak of the easiest time to trap wolves. When it comes to foot trapping, it's really difficult to catch wolves in the deep snow. Your traps freeze down, they get covered in snow, and there's a lot of complications there. So anyhow, there's just a lot of educational opportunities that I work to try to plan to help our members be successful. I attend a large number of trade shows, just with a trade show booth, trying to get the word out about who we are, what we're doing, and that there's something that people can do to help with the problem, something more than just complaining.
Yeah.
The whole SSS mentality just frustrates me so badly, and so
it is frustrating. I want to touch on that because what happens on social media and in these other places where anybody that brings up any kind of subject matter in regards to wolves, there's always a few guys on there that all they do is they type SSS. And they leave it there as if that's an actual solution. And I don't mean to pick on anybody, but they leave it there like that's an actual solution. Let me tell you something. None of these guys are out there shooting, shoveling, and shutting up. That's not how it works in wolf country. And I don't mean to get fired up about it, but we need to stop with that childish mentality. Well, that doesn't solve anything. And what you guys do solves problems, and not this SSS BS. And it's just, I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm getting fired up. I get fired up easy, man.
So and I'd love to touch on that some more too. What I think that those folks don't understand, I get it. They're frustrated. They're angry. They're disappointed. I
don't blame them for that.
I don't blame them for that either. And I understand that that's their way of expressing it. But what I don't think that they honestly understand is that by having that mentality and putting that out to the general public, all of the people who do not live where wolves are, all of the people who have never seen the carnage that comes from having too many wolves, all of those folks who are on the fence, who could very easily be swayed to support wolf management, productive wolf management, we instantly lose them when they see that. And right. It makes the job of the guys who are attending Fish and Game Commission meetings, trying to get new rules passed to make our job easier, so much harder, because the people in power, our legislators, our Fish and Game department, the commission, those guys hear constantly from people who are not from here. And when they get 100 emails over us proposing a bill, or excuse me, not a bill, proposing a rule change to the Fish and Game Commission that says, do not do this. It's really difficult when the 5 of us show up at the commission meeting and say, we really want this to go through. And there's a dozen of them standing there crying, talking about how, the poor fluffy wolf died miserable death and blah, blah, blah. And those,
such a great point.
People don't seem to understand the importance of that. If you start talking about kill them all, I understand maybe that's your personal viewpoint, and I can appreciate that. But you're not helping. You're making it harder because you're turning all of the people who could be on our side to the other side. And it makes it far more challenging to get anything accomplished. So
that's a great point. That's a great point. And I think that we all need to just come to the agreement that wolves are a problem for our ungulate populations. And the way to solve the problem is not complaining on social media about it, but showing up to meetings like you were talking about, and joining the Foundation for Wildlife Management, doing something other than just complaining about it on social media. And actually, that's what's going to make a difference, because we can't afford to keep shining a negative light on the hunting community through stuff like that. It looks bad, and the people that are on the fence with whether they're okay with hunting or they're against hunting, they will tip to the anti-hunting side if we keep throwing things out there like SSS and not showing up to meetings and showing these really bloody, nasty wolf carcasses that somebody shot. Stuff like that. We've just got to be mindful of that. It's time to move past all that old school of thought, I guess is one way to put it.
I couldn't agree more. It's just such a detriment to what we're trying to accomplish.
It is. I totally agree. So what I really liked is I sent you a list of questions that we were going to cover. I could tell I'm raising it gets echoey in my studio here when I start raising my voice. I can tell I got a little fired up. I sent you a list of questions, and you did something that I wish every guest on this show would do, and you actually answered them and sent them back before recording. Because this isn't like this isn't CNN or something where I'm trying to get a gotcha moment out of anybody that I'm talking to. It helps everything flow. But you made 2 really good points that I want to make really quick. Can you provide the basic history of wolf reintroduction? And it kind of you go through and you answer that. And a lot of us know about that. What I really like what you said is you can't focus on that. It's not about the history of it. It's where we're at now and what we're going to do about it. Can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. This is a big one for me. So many people are so focused on all of these different complexities of how we ended up with the wolf that we have. Is it the right wolf? Did they steal the Pittman-Robertson Act funding to get them here? Were they inoculated? There's so many different questions that so many people are focused on. And I guess for myself personally, and this may come across wrong, I don't care. We have a problem and we need to solve it. I don't care if it's the wrong wolf. Is it going to change the problem? No. Is it going to change how we address the problem? No. You can focus on trying to make somebody pay for something that they've done for your whole life and never accomplish anything. Mm-hmm. To me, we have a problem, and that's my general focus. There are people who are focusing on trying to punish those who stole the PR funding, who didn't inoculate. Oh, there's all these different things.
Yeah.
Is it the right wolf? Is it the wrong wolf? Wolves travel hundreds of miles at a time. The professionals who deal with wolves on a regular basis say that it's really unlikely that a subspecies really became that drastically different and disconnected from one another between Alberta, Canada, where they brought these wolves from, and central Idaho, where they put them. I really honestly don't know. I do know this. I know that there's documentation of collared wolves doing extremely drastic things. That, a wolf that spent the majority of its life down in Fairfield takes off one day, and a couple days later it gets hit in Butte, Montana. A wolf that's got a collar on it from central Idaho that ends up in Colorado, and then back up here again. There's so many different examples. There's a big one over in Oregon that they talk about. I don't remember what it was, Wolf 17 or whatever it is. Anyhow, he left the very far northeast corner of Oregon, ended up dropping all the way down through the Willamette Valley into California, came back into Oregon, and then established a home base territory over towards the coastline there.
Wow.
And has bred, and they, and all this is documented. They actually had a group of folks who went and attempted to try to travel his travel route during the same time of year that he traveled it, to try to experience or subject themselves to the same hardships that he would have subjected himself to trying to make those travels. You look at collar data from Alaska, and they've got wolves up there that travel a few hundred miles at a time, and it's not unheard of. So everybody wants to know, is it the right wolf? I can tell you my opinion. You look at take a whitetail buck from Texas that might weigh 80 to 100 pounds, and lay that down next to a whitetail buck from Saskatchewan that weighs 300 pounds. Is it a different species? No, it's a whitetail buck.
Yeah.
Is it vastly different? You bet it's different.
You made me think with that one too, because I've been guilty of that. I've been like, who is responsible for this, and why did they bring this particular wolf versus that particular wolf? And in fact, I talked about it on another podcast, and it's so I love meeting people that make me think like that. And the point that really got me was, forget about it. You write. It's open to interpretation, but it doesn't matter to me. We have a wolf problem that needs to be addressed. I have no energy to put towards this question. It's too much. There's too much to solve out there to worry about. I love that. You're exactly right. Let's quit focusing on what happened in 1995 and 1996 and start focusing on what we're going to do in the year 2020 to fix this problem. So
absolutely,
I appreciate that. And just so listeners know, why did it take so long for wolves to be turned over to state management and get off the endangered species list?
In my opinion, it's because there's groups out there who are getting rich by suing the state and suing different entities. What happens is, when these different groups create a lawsuit, they advertise all over the world that they need people to send money to help them fight the legal battle to protect this poor, cuddly, lovey wolf from absolute slaughter from a bunch of bloodthirsty redneck hillbillies.
Yeah.
And people send them money from all over the world. Then as soon as their lawsuit is deemed viable by the judge that hears the case, you and I pay all of their legal fees. All of that money goes directly in their pockets, and that's the reason why it took, 13 years, to get from meeting the requirements for states to take over management in the state to when we actually took over management in the state. Yeah. It didn't have anything to do with wolf populations. It didn't have anything to do with wolves, in my opinion. No. Those people are making a business out of using the Endangered Species Act and other such classifications to get rich. It's a business model, and they're not going to stop creating lawsuits because all that money goes in their pocket.
Yeah, there's no easy solution to that.
No.
I've always thought to myself, I've always thought two things, like, what if all the hunters pooled through $10 to this problem? Let's say there's 100,000 hunters in Idaho, for example, and everybody put in $10 and take all that money and countersue them. Or what would be even better, which I don't know what the legalities are with this, is if they could take that money And is it even possible to donate that money to the Idaho Fish and Game to help them pay for some kind of mass solution to significantly reduce elk numbers? Is that even possible?
Oh, I would say that
it's... Can they take private money like that?
Yeah, they certainly do take donations. I would imagine so. And, I've crunched numbers a million times trying to understand how to best get the mileage out of this program that we're running that we can. And with 80,000 elk hunters in Idaho alone, it shocks me that we have 3,000 total members and only 1,800 of those have paid their membership this year.
It shocks me too. So is that 80,000, is that with non-residents or is that just resident hunters?
I'd have to go back and look, but I know that for a number of years we had an average of 80,000 elk tags. It was like 80 to 120,000 elk tags sold.
I wish I had there's that dude that does that really popular podcast that says, Jamie, Google this, and I wish I could Google it, but my internet's not actually hooked up right now. So anyways, like you were saying, that's a low percentage in comparison to where it seems like everybody. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that don't believe that wolves are the issue that they are. They don't understand the magnitude of the problem because they're hunting down in, the Owyhees or all over. And I want to include this. I want to make this conversation inclusive of other Western states. We've got wolves in Washington. They're in Oregon. Colorado's about to vote on whether or not to release them, even though they've just recently confirmed there's a pack of wolves in Colorado. So I want to try to make it as inclusive throughout the American West as possible. But there sure seems to be a lot of people that have a problem with the wolf situation that are not members of the group, and I'd like to change that.
Sure.
In fact, we talked before I hit the record button that the Western Huntsman Podcast, we're a newer podcast, right? But we are actively looking for sponsorships because this stuff's expensive, man. You can see, and this is like low budget stuff right now. And so we're actively looking for sponsors. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the Foundation for Wildlife Management a free sponsorship for at least 3 months. And it might be longer, but at least 3 months. You guys are going to have this free sponsorship, and it's a way when I can't write you a check outside of my membership that I can at least give some kind of donation to the group and the cause and help with that. What I'd like to do is really encourage people listening to this to get their membership through and especially if they're out at, let's say we've got a listener in Pennsylvania, but they come to Idaho every year to hunt elk. It's beneficial to them to join Foundation for Wildlife Management. Can we get into that, or am I way off track here?
No, you can take it anywhere you want.
Let's go down that road.
All right. So I'll tell you, we do have nearly 3,000 members combined from 33 separate states, and I get the phone call and the Facebook messages often. Is the reimbursement available to non-residents? Absolutely, it is. Of those, nearly 3,000 members from 33 different states, the majority of those recreate right here in Idaho. Most recently, the conversations that I've had with folks over in Washington, they've kind of come to this discernment that, what is the best thing that they can do to assist with wolf population management, given that they don't have current management ability in the state of Washington. Help Idaho manage their wolves so that we stop spilling wolves into Washington.
Yeah.
It's the same concept for Oregon. There's Idaho wolves every year. So I don't know how deep to go into the numbers here. I guess I'm just going to throw it out there. Yeah, we have an average pack size of 7, an average litter size of 7, over 1,000 documented wolves in the state of Idaho, over 100 documented resident breeding pairs in Idaho.
100 resident breeding pairs.
Correct.
So you said, okay.
Correct. That means they do not cross the state lines. So when you have no less than 700 pups being born, granted that's an extremely conservative number because of the fact that over 30% of our alphas have been proven to be breeding with more than one wolf, meaning that a number of our packs are actually having more than one litter each year of 7 pups because more than one female gets bred. They're dogs. When they come into heat, they get bred. That's how it works. So just simply looking at the math, at the end of the year, the pack size remains at 7. And the in-state number hasn't climbed. There's only 2 things that can create that. One, first and foremost, wolves are the number 1 killer of Idaho wolves.
Mm-hmm.
They're fighting over territory and they're killing each other off. Secondly, they're dispersing like crazy. There's a reason that there's now wolves all the way across Washington and all through Oregon and all the way into California.
They didn't plant any in Washington, right? They came from Idaho, all of them.
Correct. And also from BC. But
BC.
Yes.
What about Oregon?
To my knowledge, those were not planted. Those all migrated or were dispersals from the state of Idaho.
Yeah, because they planted them in Yellowstone, in central Idaho, in northwestern Montana.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yep.
And they also discussed during the reintroduction that there would only be in a pack one breeding pair, one alpha male, one alpha female. Those would be the only ones that would breed. So their potential to grow was very much underestimated, I guess, one way to put it. Because now we know that there's, like you were saying, there's multiple breeding pairs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It takes place, I think, more commonly than people realize, and yeah, that kind of brings me to a whole nother topic. Just that whole part of the subject. Yeah, that's what they believed. That's what I believed.
Mm-hmm.
That's what most people believed. You know why? Because we watched a TV show when we were kids on National Geographic about how only the alpha male and female breed, and they act like people, and they work as a family.
And lifelong relationship kind of
yeah,
stuff.
Yeah. They breed for life and they mate for life, and they only kill the sick and the weak, and they help clean up the ecosystem. All of these far-fetched, drawn-out human characteristics were placed on wolves in order to sell a video.
Yeah.
It's television.
Yeah.
And it's for me, I had to learn that, and that's one of the reasons why it's, I think, easier for me than some folks to have the conversation with people who do not believe we should be managing wolves in any way, because I understand that they're only standing up for what they believe in. And I, too, once believed the exact same things they do because I didn't have wolves in my backyard. Yeah. Now I do. Now I understand what the reality of it is, and now it makes sense to me.
And me, I'm the same way in that there was a lot of misconceptions in the beginning. And like, I do want to say, they are a magnificent animal. They're extremely smart. They're very cunning. They know how to adapt. They're flexible. They can live in any habitat just about. It's amazing to me how they hunt. That doesn't mean I want them. I'm trying to dig through some paperwork here. That doesn't mean I want them running amok and killing all the elk. And that was the thing. What I wanted to bring up here. It's buried in all this. There it is. They were under the impression that in the state of Idaho that the elk would mainly just kill mule deer.
Wolves.
What was that?
You said elk would kill mule deer. Wolves would kill.
I'm talking about those super dangerous elk. No, you're right. You're right. So it says right here in the actual Idaho Wolf Conservation and Management Plan, it says wolves in Idaho are expected to be less reliant on elk and more reliant on mule deer and white-tailed deer compared to Yellowstone, where primary alternative prey options are bison and antelope. However, in the first year of winter predation, the study near Salmon, Idaho, deer made up only 10% of the prey killed, and it just kind of lists a bunch of other non-important specifics. But basically, elk were essentially 90% of what the wolves were killing, which is consistent in Yellowstone. In Yellowstone, as this states, quote, elk made up 89% of the 449 kills made by wolves during the winters. So these misconceptions, when you combine that with this, what we were talking about with the anti-hunting groups that make all this money by extending out and doing these lawsuits to prevent them from getting off the endangered species list, what happened there, for anybody that doesn't know, is the goal was 300 wolves?
So the overall goal was to have 100 wolves and 10 breeding pair in each of the 3 separate states. And again, I'm going to throw this out there. They say it takes a person hearing numbers 7 times before it sinks home.
Yeah.
The goal was 10 breeding pair and 100 wolves. Fish and Game increased that number to 150, said they would manage for in between 150 and 300 to 500 wolves max for the state. We currently have 100 documented resident breeding pairs and over 1,000 documented resident wolves in the state.
Number. So, in the state of Idaho, We released the first group in 1995 and the second group in 1996. How long did it take to reach 150 wolves, not breeding pair wolves, in the state of Idaho?
Well, I know that they met all of the criteria in 3 years.
In 3 years. Yeah. And it wasn't for another 10 years until they got off the endangered species list. And what happens, I guess I'm just trying to highlight this point, that what happened because of that lack of management over that 10-year, that decade, wolves were able to essentially breed with no problems from anybody. They were at the top of the food chain. Nobody's coming after them. Nobody's trapping. Nobody's hunting. They ran amok for 10 years. And now, even with having 20 permits, it is almost impossible for us to catch up as hunters and trappers. We're still not even killing as many as that are bred each year.
Correct.
Okay. I wanted that part to kind of get off my chest so everybody understands. Can you give us an unbiased synopsis of the impact of wolves in regards to elk, deer, antelope, any kind of ungulate, essentially?
So it's extremely complex, the impact from wolves, and we're learning some of this by all of the documentation that's taking place in our livestock industry. They're learning that although they can only find a certain percentage of the calves or cattle that are killed by wolves, and of those, a number of them do not have outward signs of being predated on by wolves. When they skin those carcasses, they're covered with, their hocks are all chewed up. They've basically been ran to death oftentimes. There's it's such a huge complex effect that wolves have on our big game populations. They kill more than they eat. People ask me that question, do you really think that they surplus kill? They absolutely surplus kill. I've witnessed it firsthand a number of times, and people say, oh gosh, well, they might kill it and not eat that night, but they're going to come back to feed on it. Yeah. I run my trap line every 3 days, and I have watched half a dozen moose carcasses that have never been touched after they were chased down and killed sit there and rot away and become nothing in the spring, and those wolves never returned. It's something that happens on a regular basis. So they say that each wolf consumes an average of 20 elk per year. Mm-hmm. That's actually consuming them. Then you have to take into consideration the fact that those elk are trying to winter in a certain section of ground because that's where the highest nutritional value is in their food source during the winter months. The wolves run them off of that. So now they're having to try to get through the winter months on a lesser nutrient source, a lesser quality of food source than what they typically would. In addition to that, they're dying from stress. Our winter kill is going way up because the wolves are running those elk all winter long. When the snow gets deep, wolves have really big feet and they can run on top of the snow. Those elk can't, and so they can't get away. They're constantly being stressed. Our cows and does are aborting their fetuses because of the stress that they're facing from being ran all through the winter months. We know that in cattle, the pressure from wolves causes lower conception rates. Mm-hmm. Well, for any elk hunter that's hunted the Coeur d'Alene Mountains or anywhere in Unit 1, you start blowing a cow call too much in any basin up here, and you're going to end up with wolves coming in. You can't tell me that they're not creating lower conception rates in our cow elk the same way that they are in our livestock.
I mean, just watching elk in mid-June, there's fewer calves. There are fewer calves, I swear, than there were even 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's just this. I've noticed that recently. Like the last couple of years, it's just there's a lot fewer. I don't see as many calves as I used to.
Sure. I would agree with that.
And I want people to really understand what you said there. The stressed cows will not. They don't breed as well as a non-stressed cow. And we're talking cow elk. Obviously, that happens with cattle as well. But in this case, cow elk, the stress creates aborted fetuses and lower birth rates and all sorts of things that are effects from wolves that cannot be like a tangible thing to track, right? Because Correct. There's no body or some and even a lot of the wolf kills. I was actually just watching something where it was saying that you can find these cattle ranchers were finding their dead cows, but without a mark on them.
Yep.
And what was happening, I think, and this is just me kind of guessing, is the wolves are choking them, essentially. And it takes skinning them out to determine that. Is that right?
I wouldn't say choking them. They're running them to death is what they're doing.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. So when they actually skin those carcasses on the inside under the leather, you can see there's catastrophic damage. They chew up the hocks and they chew up the armpits while they're running an animal, and they basically run them to death. And then once they stop moving, they move on. And
they don't eat them. They just leave them.
Correct. And that happens often. When they decide they're going to eat, however, they eat everything, bones and all. And it's really difficult. A lot of these guys, they're coming in 40 heads short off the open range, or they're coming in 80 heads short off the open range. If you think that doesn't affect a rancher's family, you're mistaken. I mean, those are drastic things. So if
that's thousands of dollars of revenue out of their pocket,
absolutely,
in an industry where they can't afford revenue loss.
Absolutely. And so knowing that those are documented, proven, factual pieces of information, we know that being that elk is a wolf's favorite food source, that is also taking place with our elk populations. It's just not documented. And that's one of the things that the arguments that we get is, oh, well, prove it. Where's the data that shows that? That's really difficult to wrap your mind around, or to be able to create a tangible, this is a factual hard number that we've collected from, in the wild. But you can look at other aspects that is tangible and is trackable data, such as the effects that wolves have on elk migration patterns. So for the last, whatever it is, 40, 50 years, we've had all these really healthy elk populations. We spent 130 years using the North American model of wildlife conservation to maximize all of our ungulate populations, not just for hunting, but that was a big part of it, and also for recreational use. The people that just want to go out and see wildlife.
They want to experience the West and wildlife, and not just the West, the North American model. But you're exactly right.
Absolutely. So we've built all this up. Now we bring in this apex predator, and some people seem to believe that people are no longer a part of the ecosystem, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Man is what has managed our ungulate populations for extensive periods of time. People say, oh gosh, wolves are, a necessary evil because they are the only thing that can manage our wildlife. That's bunk. Yeah. People have been managing wildlife for over 100 years. So
they've been managing wildlife in North America for thousands of years.
Yes, absolutely.
Native Americans managed our wildlife before we did. It just wasn't some formal, process like a fish and game department, right? I mean,
absolutely.
And so, yeah.
So one of the actual tangible effects that's taken place is all of these elk that have lived in the backcountry, where you and I want to go and hunt during the archery season. There is nothing like hiking out over a timbered mountain ridge line into a very desolate basin far from people, and have an elk bugle all through that canyon. That's an experience that I hope every person gets to experience. It's absolutely, it's unfathomable how awesome of an experience that is. So all of these elk that have lived in the backcountry for as long as I've been alive, the wolves come through and they drive all of those elk out into the winter ranges in the winter months. And those elk have learned that if they go back up the mountain, they're going to get eaten or they're going to get run to death. And so they don't go back. One of the things that people don't understand about elk is they're very habitual in that they follow the lead cow. If the lead cow does not go back up, they stay right there. That's where their calves are born. Now those calves that are not led back to the backcountry where they came from don't know they're supposed to go there. And so now we have all of these herds of elk that used to live in the backcountry that now don't leave the farmers' fields. The majority of our backcountry elk and the backcountry hunting experience is going away because wolves have pushed all of that wildlife out into the front country, or the ag wildland interface, as I heard it stated by the Fish and Game Department. And it's unfortunate because we just created this promo video recently, and I spent this fall running my trap line, driving through the mecca of what used to be the most awesome elk hunting in North Idaho, the Coeur d'Alene Mountains that once held the world record for the biggest elk, came off of Pack Saddle Mountain in the 80s. And I traveled that area when I was a kid. When I'd go up there and go elk hunting with my uncles, it was really hard to find a spot to pull over and park, much less set up a campsite. I drove through 75 miles of that ground on a Saturday during the middle of B-tag rifle season, and there was not one camp in all that ground.
Oh, really? In B-tag even?
During the B-tag rifle season. Wow. Because those elk are not there anymore. There's very few. I'm not going to say they're gone, because they're not. You can, if you work your tail off, you can still find an elk here or there.
Yeah.
But they're extremely jumpy. They're not easy to hunt. They're not vocal. Most of those elk are now out on the wildland ag interface, living in the Clark Fork River Valley. They're destroying crops. They're tearing down, haystacks.
Yeah, because they're not super cohesive with cattle, right? They don't really get along, right?
No.
I'm not a cattleman, so I don't. But would you say that is one of the reasons why, people kind of have this opinion? Well, I see elk all the time. Is that why? Because they're seeing them in these, as they're driving through these rural areas that you could drive 10 minutes from here out on the Rathdrum Prairie, and there's a herd of elk hanging out there, but they're supposed to be in the backcountry, not down here, right?
Absolutely.
And does that create a misconception?
It does, and it's not just that creates a misconception. There's people that live in all of North Idaho that now see more elk than they have ever seen. Uh-huh. And it's because those elk do not leave the river bottoms, they do not leave the valley floor, they do not leave the wildland ag interface. They do not leave the alfalfa fields. They're running through people's fences. They're in people's backyards. My friend Travis had all kinds of hay crop issues with elk in an area that's so dense with houses that you cannot safely fire a shot. Yeah. To run those elk out of there. Those elk have learned that it's safe ground. We have moose in downtown Sandpoint. Mm-hmm. I grew up there. We've never had moose in town until those wolves started dropping off of Baldy Mountain all the way down into Pine Street, into the Dover city limits, and running around down there. Those moose never lived down there. They've now lived not to go back.
And moose they can't afford this predation from wolves, especially in the state of Idaho. Moose, that's a touchy one.
Moose are really touchy. The elk are they're in the spotlight. That's what everybody loves to hunt, because moose is a once in a lifetime draw. There's not that many people that are in Idaho that hunt moose. Our moose have been absolutely devastated.
Absolutely, I agree. And that's actually, I've come across some elk kills for sure. The one that really hit me was I was coming off the mountain. And you can get on this road. I'm not going to say the road name. Anyway, right here at my place, and in 4 minutes you're in the Coeur d'Alene National Forest. I can go all the way to Montana. Right. Coming back one night, and the next morning I go back up to the same spot, and there was a moose completely ripped apart in the middle of this dirt road, and it wasn't there the night before. There was nothing left of this thing but the head and bones. That's how fast they took apart this moose.
Yeah, when they decide they're going to eat,
they can eat a lot. It's not like this was not a surplus kill, but I've come across plenty of surplus kills in my time. I spent a lot of time in the woods. I think you actually kicked my butt at time spent in the woods. You really get out there, especially during wolf trapping season.
I do definitely during wolf trapping season. I can honestly say I used to spend more time in the woods because I wouldn't come home oftentimes when I was deer elk hunting. But my passions kind of turned towards targeting wolves, and unfortunately my freezer suffers from that.
Well, everybody's freezers are suffering because of these wolves, though, and so it's I think that's why it's a good. That's a good analogy to put it, where we're all in this together, whether you're a trapper or you're a hunter, whether you're a resident or a non-resident, and whether you're hunting in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and soon to be Colorado, or even Oregon and Washington. We're all in this together. This is a problem.
And it's bigger than that. If you're a cattleman, if you're a rancher, if you're a farmer, you're being affected by wolves. And that's one of the things that I've worked really hard, and it's not just me. Rusty Kramer is the president of the Idaho Trappers Association. He's also on my board, and I believe he's the vice president of the Idaho Sportsmen's Association. But anyhow, Rusty and I have worked really hard over the past couple of years trying to encourage sportsmen to get back on the same page. There's so many different passions and so many different special interests, and we each focus on our own passion, and that's understandable. But when it comes to interacting with each other, for some reason, we seem to flock towards our differences and focus on that rather than what we have in common.
I couldn't agree more.
And it's so vital in these efforts that we all come back together. Wolves affect all of us, whether you're a long-range hunter or an archery guy or a traditional man, or maybe you're a bird hunter. Maybe you're just a houndsman and that's all you've ever done. Maybe you don't hunt at all. Maybe you just enjoy being in the woods, going camping and seeing wildlife.
A wildlife photographer.
Absolutely.
We're all rowing the same boat.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day.
And the statement, united we stand, divided we fall, has never held more power and more meaning than it does right now today. And we have got to get back on the same page, stop focusing on our differences, and start focusing on what we have in common so that we can create positive change.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And that's been one of the conversation topics on all of my episodes so far, is I do want to reduce that diverse gap that is created by minuscule things and people fighting on social media. I'll give you an example. I had a guy on from the Mule Deer Foundation in the last episode, right? And I tell him, I'm like, hey man, send me a picture so I can put it on to get it out there and do the promoting or whatever of the episode. Well, he's in the Mule Deer Foundation, and that dork sends me this picture of him with this monster bull elk, right? And I don't blame him, because it's a sweet elk he got. Huh? And so I get it. I'd want to put that one on there either. Well, I just, no big deal to me. I put it out there on social media, and people want to rip the whole thing apart because the episode's called Mule Deer Madness, and it's this guy AJ standing there with a bull elk, and it's a sweet elk. I was super jealous of the elk. And that's the kind of stuff we got to simmer down with that. I mean, those little details like that is not what this disparity between what you were saying, the long range versus trad bow versus all these different methods. We're all the same, and we all have the same goals, and we all face the same problems, whether it's anti-hunters, whether it's wolves, whether it's public lands issues. We all face this together, and we need to quit fighting against each other, because groups like I opened the show, I don't think it was it was like 2 episodes ago, where I was talking about PETA and in defense of animals, right? Mm-hmm. They're both fringe groups that have the same content on their website, essentially. They work together. We don't work together. Like the Mule Deer Foundation does not work great with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, where they should.
Correct.
The goals should be the same, because those anti-hunting organizations and pro-wolf organizations, they sure are. And so, anyway, I went off on a tangent there, man.
It's an important one, though. That's the thing, and I appreciate you being willing to talk about it, because in my mind, that's one of the most powerful hot button topics that we have right now. Everybody is so focused on looking at the differences. We've got to stop talking about differences and start looking at what we have in common, so we can work together for the common goals, common good, and be able to create positive outcomes.
Otherwise, if it continues like this, we're not going to have anything to pick on each other over.
Yep.
I mean, it will not stand. It was Abraham Lincoln that said it: a house divided will not stand, right?
Yep.
And that's kind of the position we're in. There's a lot of childish banter going on. We need to stop. We need to stop, guys. Let's kind of switch gears a little bit here. What diseases do wolves spread to ungulates and to humans? This is an important one for me.
Okay, so I'll just share with you up front. I typically try to avoid this conversation at all costs, and the reason is because there's a ton of different viewpoints. I have personally had some experience with high-dated cysts and tinted crebi. I was blessed to have drawn a moose tag back in 2013, and I hunted 40 days with a crank camera crew. And when I say 140 days, I don't mean like occasionally we went out here and there. I meant we hunted 40 days with a camera crew for a moose. in that time frame, we videoed 78 bulls. Only 4 of those were older than 3 years old, and one of them had dropped one side already when we found him. It ended up being a real negative experience. Long story short, I shot a bull, and it was filled with all kinds of cysts and tapeworm larvae and things. So wolves, to give you a basic rundown with hydatid disease, wolves defecate from that crap. It dries out. Animals walk through it. Spores are dispersed under the vegetation around it. Ungulates ingest that vegetation, and those spores become live larvae, and they get lost in their bloodstream because it's not like that of a canine, and so it ends up in their bloodstream, and they end up with these cysts. The most common places are lungs and liver, the different organs. It is transferable to humans. There's been people that have contracted it and have ended up with one of two things, either losing their eyesight or having a brain tumor. Those are the two most common places that it affects people. With my moose in particular, we shot a pretty nice bull, butchered it up. In my opinion, I have seen more meat come off of a spike elk than what came off of that bull moose. When we went to butcher it, I'm cutting through the backstrap, and I'm seeing all these little white pus pockets and different things all over the place. And there was different kinds in there, and I'm trimming it out as fast as I can and taking it over to my wife, and she's bringing it back to me. She was wrapping. She brings it back to me. She's like, "Here, you missed some. That's really gross. I ain't touching that." I'm like, "Okay." So I trim some more. Next thing I know, there's more meat going into the garbage can than what there was being wrapped. And so I called Fish and Game, and I just said, "Look, man, I don't know what's going on. This is really bad. I need you guys to come over and take a look at it." And they said, "Well, it is safe to consume so long as you cook it well." And so I thought, well, I am having the background that I do. I don't believe in being wasteful. I think that making use of everything you can is really vital. So it would break my heart to waste this moose meat. So I started reading into it. I read every study I could get my hands on all the different things that moose can have, and I took pictures of the things that were in my moose. And what I found was that, you can eat it if you cook it for a minimum of 12 hours at no less than 159.5 degrees. And so tapeworm larva jerky just did not sound good to me. No. Unfortunately, anyhow, big long negative thing. The reason I don't talk about that is because of what we kind of opened with here. There's a lot of issues that are surrounding the wolf topic that I can't control. So what are we going to do to fix it? Mm-hmm. The only way we can fix that issue is to reduce wolf numbers. It's far too cost prohibitive to try to go out and inoculate the wolf populations that we have. They're so hard to keep tabs on because they travel so far so quickly. They've got a 250 square mile home range, and that does not take into consideration all the traveling that they do during the breeding seasons and other times of the year. So it's extremely cost prohibitive to try to be putting collars on all these different wolves and trying to understand where they're at. I could not imagine having to catch every single wolf and inoculate them in a pack. So I can't change that. What I can do is I can try to reduce wolf numbers, and I can try to help the people who want to help send their funding to the guys that know how to get it done. That's what I've chose to focus on.
I love that because what we're talking about is elk. Let's see, wolf consume each individual wolf. Geez, man, I'm screwing this all up. Each individual wolf will consume about 20 elk. Is that what? Correct.
About 20 elk per year.
Per year. There's 1,000 wolves in the state of Idaho that we, that's a conservative. Am I right in saying that's a conservative estimate of the amount of wolves?
I would venture to say that is an extremely conservative.
I would agree with that. Yeah. But on those numbers, 1,000 wolves times 20 elk per year. I mean, we're talking 20,000 dead elk
that are consumed.
Not including the surplus killings, not including the calves that are not born due to stress and aborted fetuses and everything else that happens. And then you can always add in other things like mule deer and whitetail that definitely have a toll on it. So that's, I think, why I get your hesitation to talk about the diseases and how they can spread to, the possibility of spreading to humans and things like that. But the reason why I wanted to bring that up is because I think a lot of people underappreciate the magnitude and the vastness of this problem. And so there's all these different elements of it. And if we just have a little bit of information on everything so that we get a full picture of the magnitude of this wolf problem. This isn't a couple of guys that are just fired up because we didn't get an elk last year, right? Because
No.
there's a lot of hunters that they use it as an excuse. They didn't get an elk because whatever.
Sure.
I get that. In a lot of cases, it's true though. In a lot of cases, it's true that, like you were saying, they're not as vocal as they used to be. Anyways, that's why I wanted to touch on that. And we touched on ranchers. The highest depredation numbers ever recorded in the state was last year from Idaho ranchers, right?
Correct.
Is that consistent with Montana and Wyoming, or do you just know about the Idaho part?
I can't say that for certain. I have seen some posts come up recently about Montana breaking records as well. Yeah, I don't want to try to comment on other states because I'm not as well versed there. I can tell you that 2018 was the highest number of livestock depredations ever recorded in the state.
Gotcha. And I believe it. You catch a lot of hell on social media sites.
I do.
I always appreciate the way you respond because, I'm kind of I've got a temper. I get fired up and I don't respond as nicely as you do. And I need to learn from guys like you that know how to respond this way. How do you respond? Actually, this way. You get attacked on social media over one of your wolf posts by some of these pro-wolf people. Respond to them on this podcast. Respond. Somebody says, you are an evil bastard or whatever they say. They get pretty harsh, and I don't want to repeat that language on this podcast, but they call you all sorts of names and tell you how bad it is to kill wolves and how great wolves are. Respond to them.
I just simply try to, first thing I will share with you, I also have a temper. It's so
you control it better than I.
So I really try to make myself think back to what my mentality was before we had wolves here, because I don't get those responses from people who live with wolves.
Yeah.
Those responses come from people who do not live with wolves, have never seen a wolf, have never been around wolves, have never seen the carnage, have never seen the surplus killing.
They haven't ever seen one of their neighbors who's a rancher go out of business because of the revenue lost by the wolf depredation. I want to point out before we continue with this one is I don't remember what he said, but you had posted something, and like I always do with this stuff, I start going through and reading the comments. He called you a name, and it was defending wolves and whatever, and I clicked on his profile. It's on Facebook. This one's on Facebook. Go over to his profile. He lives in freaking Pennsylvania.
Yep.
What the hell kind of sense of reality do they have? Okay, that's not the right direction to go. I was watching, and I'm like, oh man, I think Justin's gonna get him. He's just gonna get this guy. And actually, you gave a fantastic response. I should have screenshot it so I could read it. It was a great response, but it was super nice, and he actually got the guy talking with you.
Yeah. And
he actually kind of came around. I don't know for sure if it was Pennsylvania. It was somewhere back east though. Anyways, let's go back into your answer.
So very first thing, when I see something like that, I read it thoroughly. I try to think about what their beliefs are, and I try to remember what mine were before I had wolves in my backyard. And I try to remember that these people are only standing up for what they know and what they believe to be the truth. So I simply try to, if they're bashing me and they're cussing me out and stuff, I let them know that I don't appreciate that behavior. But if they want to have an adult conversation, I'd be happy to explain to them the reasoning behind this. And then I just simply go into facts. Most of those people, they've seen a post that says kill them all. They've seen a post that says shoot, shovel, and shut up. Yeah. They've seen a bloody wolf picture that didn't need to go on social media. And they believe that we're a bunch of bloodthirsty rednecks and that the last wolf is about to lose its life. And when they see my picture of a wolf posted up there, they think I've just taken one of the last 5 alive in the state of Idaho because of those other posts. So I have to keep that in mind when I'm talking to them, and I just simply try to educate them. how many wolves do you really believe that we have in Idaho? What is it that's brought you to this mindset of thinking this? And I share with them, we've got an average pack size of 7. Wolves expand at 40% a year if they're not managed. Our average litter size is 7. Our management plan calls for managing 150 wolves. That's not what's required. The bare minimum required in the state is 10 breeding pairs and 100 wolves. That was the goal. We have more than 10 times what we're supposed to be managing for, and they have caused all kinds of havoc. Those people don't hear about that. They don't know that there's elk that won't leave Farmer Jones's field and have now destroyed thousands of dollars in fencing, have now eaten hundreds of thousands of dollars in alfalfa. They don't know that they can no longer come here and go into the wilderness areas and go into the backcountry regions like you used to be able to 10 years ago and hear an elk bugle. They don't know that. Yeah. Nobody's ever told them that. Nobody's ever taken the time. Most people, they hear those folks' frustration and they immediately react rather than responding.
Yeah.
And it's so important to stop, think it through, and respond in an educated way, treat them with respect. I know that if somebody comes at me attackingly about a different subject, I shut down. I'm not willing to listen to it. I want to fight back. That's my reaction. Yeah, that's what their reaction is going to be if you treat them that way. If you fire off something offensive right back at them, they're never going to hear what you have to say. Even if they read the whole comment, they're never going to hear it. Mm-hmm. If you treat them with respect and you treat them the way you would want to be treated, and you educate yourself enough that you can educate them with not oh gosh, I haven't killed an elk in 30 years because the wolves did this, whatever. Come to understand what's really taking place. Educate yourself. Reach out to the fish and game biologist that studies our predators in the state. Educate yourself so that you can help educate them. If you approach them in a way that's non-combative, that's just simply informational, you treat them with respect, more often than not, those people want to have an adult conversation with me. I can't tell you how many times I have people come on my page and they attack me, and when they leave, they thank me for the information. They may not like me still. They may not like the idea that I've taken a wolf. They may even have a disdain for me.
Sure.
But the majority of those people leave educated, and most of them are willing to come back and have the conversation. And I would venture to bet that 80% of those people have respect for me when they leave the conversation.
Yeah.
And 80% of those people have changed their thought process before they leave the conversation.
If nothing else, you have made them think, and I can see that in their response back to you.
Absolutely.
And so it's kind of cool to watch. It's interesting. I need to learn more of that because I wanted to get on an airplane and fly over to wherever he was and just put him in a headlock and give him a wedgie and all sorts of stuff.
Well, I'm certainly no angel. I've got buttons just like everybody else. Some people you're not going to change their mind. They didn't come to listen. They were closed-minded when they made the statement, and they're not going to hear anything you say anyhow. Those people, I simply hit the block button. It's not worth the effort.
That's probably what's best. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think wolf activists, what do they not understand about the realities of wolf management? Kind of expanding on it. I mean, you just really covered it very well because they're not here.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that let's talk about how they perceive somebody living in Florida
mm-hmm.
or, Arkansas or Pennsylvania or wherever, New York. Is there anything to add to that? What do they not understand about wolf management?
Wolf management. Period. They don't understand it at all. They don't understand how fast they reproduce. They don't understand the problems that they cause. They don't understand the reality of what a wolf is. They believe that a wolf is what National Geographic painted a wolf to be. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty snuggly little animal that doesn't hurt anybody. They clean up the sick and the weak and the diseased in our big game populations. They act as a family group. They have feelings just like you and me, and that's their perception of what a wolf is. And they believe that a wolf will not outpopulate its prey base. They believe that wolves are vital to managing other wildlife mm-hmm. because they don't consider man to be part of the ecosystem, which is a huge mistake. We are the apex predator.
And not mankind from 200 years ago.
Correct.
I mean, they didn't 200 years ago. They didn't have freeways. They didn't have large cities in metropolitan areas and dams on rivers and on all this stuff that affects these animals. And I think the other mispoint that pro-wolf people have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they have this misconception, and I think you kind of touched on this, that we want to go out and kill every last wolf out there.
Yep.
And that's not true. I don't want wolves to be extinct. What I do want is, instead of 1,000 wolves running around the woods of Idaho, I mean, is it reasonable to expect and almost demand that we all do something to get that below 500 wolves?
I think that it depends on what you want. It's not up to me to tell you what you want, but I can tell you this. Our management plan says that Idaho's wildlife can sustain up to 300 to 500 wolves. And if we were able to cut our wolf numbers in half by waving a magic wand, I would love the opportunity to do so. And it's not because I'm anti-wolf. It's not because I hate wolves.
Yeah.
Wolves are the most amazing animal I have ever encountered. I will say that bar none. I went into this project with a huge disdain for wolves based on what I had witnessed them do firsthand. Mm-hmm. And it was crushing to me. And I had a major, I'm not going to say hatred, but I definitely was not happy with wolves. The more I spend time around them, the more I study them, the more I try to harvest wolves, the more I learn about them so that I can be successful in helping manage wolf populations, the more respect I have for them as an animal. They are the smartest critter I've ever faced.
They
and
are.
I would never wish extinction on any animal. Except maybe mosquitoes, but
I'm with you on that. Dang mosquitoes.
Wolves are amazing, and
yellow jackets. I hate.
And yellow jackets, sure. People think that I am anti-wolf. They think that I have no respect for them. They think that I'm just a bloodthirsty redneck.
Yeah, you
hillbilly.
just want, it's going to be in your mind, chitty chitty bang bang. Let's go out and kill every last wolf on the planet.
Yep.
No, that's not the case, and I think that's the case with 99.9% of outdoorsmen in the American West. We don't want the complete annihilation of wolves.
No.
We just want them to stop spreading, and I love that 300 number. I could deal with 300 wolves in the state of Idaho.
Absolutely.
But being reality-wise far north of 1,000 is affecting everything, and it's like, this is a huge consensus. This isn't your opinion or my opinion or Joe Bob's down at the bar's opinion. The Fish and Game acknowledge it. Hunting organizations throughout the country acknowledge it. It's a major issue. And so, anyway, going off on another rant there. What about the hunting community? What are they doing wrong with wolves?
What is the hunting community doing wrong with wolves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In my opinion, they are portraying a hatred of wolves, which in turn causes people who don't know anything about wolves to believe that we're a bunch of bloodthirsty redneck hillbillies that want to kill all of them. And that is making the task of managing wolves 10 times as hard as it needs to be.
It feeds the fire to those anti-groups, those anti-hunting groups. And yeah, totally agree. Let's talk about the foundation.
Okay.
Let's see. We got so the Foundation for Wildlife Management started. Was it 2011? Is that what you said?
2011 was when we started. We got our 501c3 status in 2012. We started reimbursing wolf harvest in 2012, and it's just kind of grown from there. We started out with basically a handful of guys in a living room trying to figure out what we could do to be productive, to identifying that those guys were willing to pool some money to help a trapper be successful at harvesting wolves. And from there it grew to, we've got enough interest that we want to help all trappers control wolves. We want to help the hunting community learn how to hunt wolves. We want to support these guys who are willing to get done with their hunting season and get back in the woods to target wolves. We want to help those guys. Mm-hmm. And from there, it's grown and expanded. Now, I think I mentioned to you, we're just shy of 3,000 members, grand total. We've got about 1,800 that are currently paid membership dues. We now have 4 different chapters. We've started the Sandpoint chapter was our first. We've got a Coeur d'Alene chapter. We have a Clearwater chapter. We have a Treasure Valley chapter, and looking forward to getting an Idaho Falls area chapter going. Each year we do fundraising banquets. I mentioned that we kind of use that as our business model, mimicking some of the larger nonprofits who are focused on wildlife management. We have a banquet coming up in Sandpoint, which is a really big deal. Tons of fun. We bring in a lot of mounts and decorations and things, and we try to go above and beyond to put on a really great banquet. It sells out typically at over 600 people. We can't put more than that in the room without it being too cramped. Yeah, so that one usually sells out. That's February 8th in Sandpoint at the Bonner County Fairgrounds. We've got the Coeur d'Alene banquet is coming up March 7th in the Jacqueline building at the Kootenai County Fairgrounds. We've got a banquet April 4th in Lewiston for the Clearwater chapter. That's at the Elks Lodge there. And then we just established the date of May 23rd for the Treasure Valley chapter, and that banquet will be in Nampa at the Idaho Expo Center.
Oh, good. And how effective has your organization been in regards to reducing wolf numbers?
That's a catchy question. So we've got I can tell you, as far as reducing wolf numbers, sportsmen have never harvested the number of wolves as were born in any given season since we started this. Not one time.
That's scary.
We fund $500 statewide, $750 in any unit that's not meeting elk management objectives, including the entire panhandle, and $1,000 reimbursement in units 10, 12, and unit 1. And still to this date, even with those reimbursement amounts, we've never harvested the number of wolves that were born in any given season. So for somebody to ask me how are we doing as far as being successful removing wolves or reducing wolf numbers, I can't say that we have been. What I can tell you, however...
So much for my phone being on Do Not Disturb.
That's hilarious. So I can't tell you that we've reduced wolf numbers. What I can tell you is this. I don't want to know what our landscape would look like with another 725 wolves added to it. We've just experienced, the highest depredations ever recorded. And if you added 700 more wolves to that, our Idaho Wolf Control Board would be extremely busy. We've got the Idaho Wolf Control Board was founded or created by the governor of Idaho. It's funding that is strictly to be used for lethal removal of wolves from problem areas. For the Idaho Wolf Control Board to remove a single wolf, it takes approximately $9,000 on average to get that job done. Granted, those folks have got to jump through a ton of hoops. They've got a ton of red tape. There's a ton of investigation that goes into their obtaining the ability to remove a wolf. Mm-hmm. But bottom line, it costs $9,000 to remove those wolves per wolf. Yeah. 65% of that is state tax dollars. $110,000 comes from fish and game tags and license sales, mm-hmm. And there's matching funding from
fish and game.
Yeah, no. So we have there's $110,000 that comes from the fish and game tags and license sales, and then there's $110,000 that comes from the agriculture industry. It's actually from branding fees from the cattlemen, and so. If you think about that, the 725 wolves that we've removed, if we had to pay $9,000 a wolf to remove those wolves, that's over $6.5 million that it would have taken the state to do what we have done 100% free of tax funding through volunteer efforts.
Do you think that Idaho hunters, and obviously if you want to do this in other western states, feel free, but do you think, because you're out there, you're in front, you've got a good pulse on a lot of the hunting community and people that you're meeting with. Would people be willing to spend an extra $5 on their deer tag or elk tag or something like that could be a direct fund going right to Idaho Fish and Game and their efforts to manage wolves, to, like you were talking about, $9,000 per wolf? Is something like that viable?
I think that it could be, but I do know that there is some level of disdain There's a lot of people who falsely blame the Fish and Game Department for our wolf issues, and there's a lot that goes into that whole discussion. That's a discussion for a whole nother day. But I will say this: we have thought a lot about trying to understand what it takes to have Fish and Game licensed vendors. Simply, when a person's making a purchase, say, would you like to donate $1 to the Foundation for Wildlife Management for wolf population control, and trying to create funding that way. I do know that of the $400,000 that's typically given annually to the Idaho Wolf Control Board, we do not have access to any of that funding at all whatsoever. It cannot be distributed to private entities the way it was presented to me.
Yeah, gotcha. And I want to just clarify one thing for listeners on a point you made there. The Idaho Fish and Game are not the ones that released wolves into the state of Idaho. And you have to remember and this is like this with any, whether it's like Montana Parks and Wildlife, I believe is something like
Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Yeah. Idaho Fish and Game. In some states it's DWR and all these different entities. They have to cater to several different groups, not just elk hunters, right? They have to cater to people that are they're hikers, they're bird watchers, they're nature photographers, all these different groups and that want to share the resources. And so, give them a break. Give these guys they got a tough job. We talked about that in the last episode too, a little bit. So it takes 29 new memberships to fund one wolf harvest, and explain that, because one wolf harvest is generally $500 reimbursement or $1,000 in like Unit 1 or the Lolo.
Correct. So at $1,000 per wolf, it takes 29 memberships to fund that one wolf harvest.
Okay.
I want to say at this point in time, the last stats that I read, we had trapped 180 wolves. I believe this year statewide. That's not what we've funded. I believe we have funded approximately 120 wolves, 125 maybe this year.
Have you written checks to anybody that are non-residents?
Yeah, absolutely. We have, certainly.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's one of the things that took place this last year. It's kind of a funny story, but being a little bit green in media and marketing and trying to understand the concepts of how that all works, I was trying to build an ad for the foundation to go on the back of the Idaho Trappers Association magazine, and I comprised this little ad. I put some things together and I put it on Facebook, and I said, I could really use some media advice here. Anybody that has marketing experience, please tell me what you would do with this. Mm-hmm. And they, a couple of people came on there and they gave some really great ideas. I was all excited about it, and I took those ideas and I tweaked my ad a little bit, and I said, well, what do you guys think of this? And they said, oh, it's great, but I do this different, I do that different. And so I changed a couple of things. Well, excuse me, that next day, I was actually headed south to Boise to go to the Idaho Fish and Game Commission meeting. I believe that's what it was. Anyhow, so I jump in my truck and I'm headed south, and I get about halfway to Boise and I get a voicemail. And, phone never even rang, and I pick up my phone and I check my voicemail while I'm driving, and it's the director of the Fish and Game Department. And he says, Justin, I don't know what you just put on social media, but you got to take it down right now.
Oh, no.
And I just panicked. I pulled over the side of the road and I called him right away. I said, what's going on? He says, I don't know, but we've got people calling the station wanting to know why it is that we're trying to kill off all our wolves. Other ones are trying to figure out how they can get $1,000 for the wolf they just caught. There's all these different things. And so it was a real learning experience for me. That unfinished advertisement that was supposed to be distributed only to trappers on the back of a trapping magazine took off on social media, and it went around the world.
It went viral, man.
It was insane. And by the next afternoon, I could not delete voicemails fast enough to keep it from being full.
Wow.
We actually had people come here to hunt wolves from Africa, New Zealand, Australia.
Really?
It took off, and people were excited about it, and still to this day, it's probably 2 to 3 phone calls a day that I get from people from out of state that say, I have always wanted a wolf. Tell me what I got to do. And
that'd be an easy reimbursement right there, just because just getting here is going to be $500 from
absolutely.
Somebody coming from the Midwest or something.
Some of these people are traveling great distances, and I try really hard to be realistic with them. I let them know what the odds are. I tell them what our we've got a hunter success rate of less than 0.25%, and there's a lot of guys in Idaho that are passionate about hunting, that have spent their whole life in these woods, that know them like the back of their hand, and they can't get it done. So please don't think that you're coming to Idaho and that you're going to go home with 20 wolves, because it just doesn't happen that way. That being said, I've got some amazing stories of people. I had a gal from Oregon. I don't even think she had much hunting experience, but her husband hunted a little bit. She really wanted to come on a wolf hunt, and she called and she asked me all kinds of questions, and I visited with her a little bit. Messaged back and forth on Facebook. I encouraged her to go to this one area. She actually goes to small town of Orofino, and she goes into a little cafe. She sits down, has some breakfast or dinner or whatever it was, and she gets to visiting with this logger that's sitting there. And she says, we just drove over from Oregon to hunt wolves. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, this poor gal doesn't have a chance of harvesting a wolf. This logger says, up such and such drainage, I'm pretty sure that we saw a kill up there not too long ago. This little gal drives up the mountain the very next day, first day she's in town. She goes in, has a meal, talks to this guy. She drives up the mountain, walks over the ridge, giant black wolf stands up, she dumps it.
Oh, jeez.
She calls me up. That was easy. Yeah. What do I got to do to get my reimbursement? And she went home with a trophy, and her trip was funded by the reimbursement.
Black.
Yeah, and it was a black wolf. So it can be done.
That's awesome.
It happens.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's I've never been that lucky. How does that happen?
I don't know. I hear stories all the time. Guys call me up and say, "Oh my gosh, you're never going to believe this. I missed a wolf today." Really? You got a shot and you missed? Yeah, like 5 times. I come around the corner and there's all these wolves running down the road, and I stopped and I got out and I chased them up the ridge, and I got 3 or 4 different shots, but I don't think I hit any of them. I couldn't find blood anywhere. I'm just thinking, you've got to be kidding me. I have never come around the corner and had a wolf standing in the road.
Never. Yeah. And it's just not my like I said, the closest thing I was elk hunting. And I walked like 100 yards from my truck and started blowing on a cow call. And no kidding, 2 wolves started. They were less than 100 yards from me, but it was so brushy I couldn't see them.
Yeah.
They kind of howl at me. And so I cow called back because I had a wolf tag. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's on. I'm going to be on these guys like a drunk on free peanuts, man. Yeah. It's all over with. And so I cow call again, and like it was like this older, wiser wolf a little further away did this really low moany kind of howl, and they disappeared. Like aliens abducted them, they were gone.
Yeah.
Closest I've ever got. And it was a hopeful day. Do you have a way on your website, what is the website?
It's f4wm.org.
Okay, I'm going to, and guys, obviously with anything, I'm going to link that in the show notes. Do you have a way to, like, they can put in some kind of promo code or something like that to track? Because what I want to do is I have in my possession a very nice Phelps bugle tube that I'm going to give away if there's a way we could figure out who listened to this podcast, right? And
sure.
And got a membership. Is there a way to do that?
So in the online setup, sign up, at the bottom of the form, I believe it's at the bottom of the form, it actually states, where did you hear of us from? And that we actually put that on there last summer when we were doing a membership drive, and whoever recruited the most members, actually, as you were recruiting other members, you were put into a drawing for a rifle, and we gave a gun away. So that is still on there, and I'm really excited to see that people are using that when they sign up. They'll tell us whether they heard it on a podcast or whether it was from a social media post or they heard about it from an event advertisement on the radio or whatever it happens to be. So we can certainly put something together there if somebody comments that.
What I'm thinking is like run this through till that banquet in April 4th in Lewiston, just so it's not too long extended. If we run this and people that get on there and they put where did you hear this from down at the bottom of the website, put in the Western Huntsman Podcast. You could, like, instead of sending me a bunch of names, you could just send me, like, maybe member numbers or something like that, and I could draw a number, send it back to you, and whoever the winner is, I'll send them a bugle tube.
Sure, that sounds great.
enough?
Yeah, we can do that. So it'll actually it's in the actual sign up form online. So as they're signing up as a member, they can put that they heard about us from the Western Huntsman Podcast.
So remember that, guys. If you jump on there, and you do not have to, like we stressed before, you don't have to be an Idaho resident for this. This is something that benefits anybody who hunts Idaho. Heck, anybody that hunts in Washington, Oregon, Montana, these things are just fluid back and forth across the state lines. So I'm going to give away a bugle tube to somebody who signs up. I know it's not much, but, this isn't what am I, Donald Trump? I don't have a lot of money. Anyway, so that's what we're going to do. The last question, because we're going a bit long here, and I know you got a meeting to get to, right?
I do, yeah.
Do you have time to answer like a scenario? A frustrated elk hunter decides that he wants to make a real impact and start trapping wolves. What are the 3 most important things he needs to do or learn to be successful and get into trapping? I know it's kind of a wild card question, but because there's a lot to it.
It is, and that's one of the things you had asked about. What does a guy do to get involved in trapping, or what is the process? What does it take to trap a wolf? Mm-hmm. And that is a very long, drawn-out list of things that have to all come together. And so that's a pretty big question. A couple of things that I'll just throw out there. I don't remember what it was that I wrote on my sheet now, but I will tell you this. Some things that we've learned about wolves. The number one trait of guys who are successful on a regular basis is they are very persistent and they are very patient. Wolves travel such great distances that it oftentimes takes them 3 to 5 weeks to come back through a piece of ground. One of the things that I get, people will call me and they'll say, I heard there was, I'm just going to throw out Johnson Creek as an example. They'll say, I heard there was wolf sign up Johnson Creek and I'm going to go hunt wolves in Johnson Creek, and Johnson Creek may be 10 miles long and 5 miles across. What they don't understand is that just because there's sign there doesn't mean that there's wolves in Johnson Creek. Yeah. You're looking for 7 dogs in a 250 square mile home range. And in one night, they may hunt 10 or 15 basins the size of Johnson Creek. So just because there's sign there doesn't mean there's wolves in that basin. So when it comes to trapping wolves or even hunting wolves, you have to use their instincts against them. The number one trapper's set is a P-post. Wolves have territories, and just like your house dog, when you take your house dog for a walk and it pees on the fire hydrant at the corner, a wolf does the very same thing. Every time he passes through an area, he pees on a tree or a bush or a stump or a clump of bear grass somewhere. And our number one set for catching wolves in traps is a P-post set. You simply spray a tree with coyote urine, and when a wolf comes by, he's going to stop there and pee on it. I actually use my chocolate labs when I'm targeting wolves, and I run them in front of me, and they will peel off the road and run 50 feet out of the way to go mark a P-post that a wolf has urinated on.
Your labs will?
Yes, absolutely. Any canine will. And so that's the easiest way for me to find them. And I think that that's one of the things that's helped me be successful, because I'm able to use their own instincts against them by implementing the use of my dogs. When I make a dirt hole set, my dogs dig the hole. House dogs have scent glands in between their pads, just like wolves and coyotes and everything else do. All canines do. So they're leaving canine scent everywhere. Well, wolves are very, very territorial. That's an instinct that you can use against them. That's the same thing with using a howler call for hunting wolves. You're using their instincts against them. They're so territorial, they do not want another canine in their territory. Now, I've heard a ton of people say, oh gosh, I know the wolves are here because the coyotes are all gone. And I couldn't disagree more. That's the one thing that I believed to have been true when I first started this. I've got P-posts where a coyote will go through and he will mark it every 3 days. And a wolf will come back and mark it right over top of him, and then the coyote will mark it, and then the wolf will mark it, and the coyote will mark it, and the wolf will mark it.
Like a little turf war.
Yeah, they definitely have turf wars. Now, and my coyotes don't disappear when the wolves are in the basin. They just don't. They're still there. Mm-hmm. I think that if they run into each other face to face, that's going to be a whole different issue. I actually had a coyote, the poor little bugger got caught in one of my wolf traps, and the wolves came through while he was in the trap.
Oh, no.
It was not a pretty sight, I can tell you that. So, but So patience and persistence, and don't give up. Guys will call me and they say they're all excited. I got wolf tracks everywhere I elk hunt. So I went and bought some wolf gear, and my gear just showed up, and I'm all excited. How do I prep it? So I tell them how I prep my traps. Everybody does it a little bit different. They call me up again. They say, gosh, I went out and I set all this gear out, and I'm so excited. I can't wait. I'm going back in 3 days, and I'm going to catch a wolf. And they go back in 3 days, and they come back and they're like, well, they haven't come through yet, but I'm excited. Boy, this weekend I'm going back up, and I'm going to catch a wolf. Mm-hmm. That weekend they go up there. It snowed a little bit. They come back down. And they're like, man, they haven't come back through yet. I'm like, well, just be patient. About a week goes by, and they call, and now their excitement started to fade a little bit. By the second week, they're like, man, I wonder, did I do something wrong? No, you didn't do anything wrong. Just be patient. They'll be back through. Well, do I need to add scent to it? I don't rescent any of my sets all year. I think it's fine. Just leave it alone. By the third week, now it's snowed a foot. They've had to go up and dig the snow off their traps, and they're a little bit frustrated. Still haven't seen sign of wolves anywhere in the basin, and they say, gosh, I don't know. I think I did something wrong. I think I should probably move somewhere else. And I tell them, don't touch your gear. Keep it working. Uncover the traps. If you get too much snow on them, make sure they're not frozen to the ground, but do not give up. Do not throw in the towel, because it takes them 3 to 5 weeks to come back through. If you pull your gear out, you're not going to get the opportunity that you waited this whole time and worked this whole time to get. Yeah. 4th week comes up, and they are frustrated. Now it snowed 3 feet. They blew up their snowmobile trying to get there. They are just frustrated. Their wife's ready to kick them out of the house because everything smells like skunk or whatever lure they're using. And they say, man, I don't know if this is for me. I must have done something wrong. And I tell them, leave your gear there. Don't give up. And this has happened numerous times. My favorite one was a gentleman down in the Clearwater. He went up to pull all his gear out, even though I was begging him not to, and he had a wolf standing there.
Oh, really?
And it's in the trap. And it's there's a lot to be said. The guys that produce on a regular basis are the guys that don't throw in the towel when everybody else goes home. And it's you just have to be consistent and persistent and patient. It's a waiting game.
So at a bare minimum, what would somebody need to plan expense-wise to get into trapping? Now, I'm not talking about buying the snowmobile and all that. I'm just the actual trapping gear. What does that cost look like?
You don't want to know.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. So it's expensive. It depends on whether you're going to trap or snare. There's considerable cost difference there. A lot of people try to snare.
What do you recommend?
I personally have gone to just trapping, and there's a number of different reasons there. I have snared some wolves. I've had some success there. Snares definitely have their place and are a vital tool to control wolves, especially when the snow gets extremely deep. But one of the things that takes place when you catch a wolf is your very best opportunity to get to catch the next wolf is having more traps around where that wolf was standing. So a wolf pack, just bear with me. I'll try to go into a little bit of story. So you go up, you set all your gear, and it's in an area where there's wolf sign. The wolves cross through there, and you've worked really hard to keep your gear working. If I set one trap, I'm going to set 3 traps, and sometimes up to 10 traps, depending on the crossing and what's taking place. Mm-hmm. And this is the reason why. The pack comes through. Maybe they're 200 yards apart, maybe they're 2 miles apart as they hunt through a piece of ground, and you catch one wolf in a trap, in a foot trap. The whole pack at some point in the next 2 days, most likely within a couple of hours, is going to converge on where that wolf is trapped. Your very best chance of catching a second wolf is while that wolf is still standing there in the first trap. And so when you've got other traps all around there in different areas, the wolf pack will travel all around there. They're waiting for the wolf that's stuck there, that's for whatever reason not leaving with them. And they...
Let me clarify.
Yeah.
You set the first trap, it catches a wolf, and you leave him there and set more around it?
No.
Or you set him prior to the actual...
That's why I'm saying I gang set. if I set one trap, I'm going to set at least 3 traps, because in the time frame... So the wolf comes through, he gets caught. So typically, if you get a mature dog from the pack, the rest of the pack is going to come to them. Within a few hours. That night, the rest of the pack is going to be standing there looking at that wolf saying, why are you not coming with us? We're going over there.
Yeah.
Okay. So while they're standing around there, the young of the year, the wolves that have never experienced trapping, they're going to be milling around, and every scent or lure that you have that can capture their curiosity, they're going to go right over there and investigate it. They're not cautious. They're just hanging out with their buddy. The leader of the pack, or one of the adult dogs that they're submissive to is not leaving, so therefore they're not leaving. So that's your best chance of catching another wolf. So when I go in and I remove those wolves from those traps, I'll go in as quietly as possible. I leave as bare minimal human scent as possible. I'm very cautious not to leave any wolf blood anywhere. I remove those wolves. I dispatch them. I remove them. I clean up everything the best I can. I'll set some more gear, and I get the heck out of there as fast as I can, because the last thing they remembered was their wolf was standing right there, and they're coming back that night to look for it and trying to figure out why it's not coming with them. And so when they show back up, you have really great odds of catching more. The hardest part about trapping a wolf is getting them to your set and having your set work. So if you have wet snow and it snows, let's say it snows 8 inches and it rains on top of
it. Like it did 2 days ago.
Yes. And that's just down here. Up there, you're looking at a couple of feet at least. So it snows 8 inches and the wolf comes by and it's wet, heavy snow. When a wolf steps on that trap, as his weight collapses the snow under his foot, the snow fires the trap before his foot ever gets there.
Oh, man.
Okay. So you have to keep your traps operable, meaning you have to keep them clear of snow on top. Some guys elevate the trap in the snow. Some guys, like myself, I'll dig a trough. I just dig everything out. I don't like to touch my trap. When I go in there, I have my dogs come with me. They walk behind me to obliterate my own human tracks. I shovel off all of my set, clean it clear down to the ground, and then I have my dogs heel and put them behind me, and I walk out. And their tracks and my tracks, 2 things. 1, it covers up me having been there.
Your scent, yeah.
2, when they come in there and they're seeing another canine has been all over that ground, it frustrates them, and I think that it kind of takes the edge off it. It kind of throws them off a little bit, so they're not quite as weary, and so they're much more likely to make a mistake. When you catch the next wolf, same thing. You leave no trace, no blood. Get out of there as fast as you can. Your body is constantly shedding scent, hair follicles, skin molecules. If a house dog can track a man through a busy shopping mall 24 hours after he dropped a cigarette butt by sniffing that cigarette butt, you bet your butt that a wolf knows you were there. You cannot trick their nose. They know you're there. The trick is minimizing your scent to a point to where they're no longer fearful.
It's not a threat in their mind.
Yeah, it's not a threat in their mind. So trapping, the question was about, excuse me, the question was about expense.
I can tell you get pretty excited about this.
I'm serious about it. It's something that I'm really passionate about. So my traps are running me approximately $68 to $70 a piece to get them set up with chain and swivels and all the things that need to have on them to be productive. And then in addition to that, I'm also running about 10 feet of chain with a couple of drags on that, which is added expense. Some of my gear I anchor down with what's called an earth anchor. You just drive it in the ground. It's on a cable or a chain, and you can tie your trap off to that. But so
several $100s to get set up.
Yeah, to get started
with
for foot trapping.
Traps,
absolutely,
right? Because you don't want to just go spend all this time for one trap. Let me ask you this. What is like your record in terms of the shortest amount of time and the most amount of wolves? Like you trapped, 5 wolves in 7 days or something like that.
I caught 4 wolves in 2 nights.
Sweet.
That's my best, and that was just this year. I actually was really excited about that.
I remember when you posted that. Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, it actually, I didn't end up making it up for 2 days after the first night, but judging by what I saw there, those wolves had come back in the very first night after I'd removed the first 2, and I picked up 2 more there, and they had been there, for that one full day.
That's awesome. Well, I think we're coming up on 2 hours here. This is the kind of conversation I can keep going, and I say this a lot, but like legitimately I can keep this conversation going all night long. But I know we both have commitments, and we're gonna have to get you back on. I think at some point.
Sure.
There's a lot of ground to cover with this. To reiterate to the listeners, the foundation for wildlife management, in my opinion, whether you live in Idaho or you live in the West or you live anywhere in the United States but hunt Idaho or hunt out west, Washington, Oregon. The Foundation for Wildlife Management is probably the most important at this time, at this stage in our life. It's going to be the most crucial and critical foundation for people to get involved with. And I genuinely mean that. And that is not to take away from other organizations. I love the RMEF. I love the Mule Deer Foundation, all these other groups, right? But at this point, we're at a juncture where we have to decide if it's either wolves are going to thrive and nothing else, or wolves need to be managed so everything thrives. And really, I believe that if we work together with Idaho Fish and Game and other hunters and other organizations, I think we can achieve what all of us as hunters want to achieve. And so I really encourage this audience. I try not to be obnoxious about this part, but in this episode, I don't care. Text this link to this episode out to everybody you know. Share it on Facebook. Share it on Instagram. Share it wherever you guys can. I appreciate that, and I think that it'll go a long way towards building the membership that is necessary, because the more membership that's involved in the Foundation for Wildlife Management, the more funding that is available to hunters and trappers that are out there spending their winters chasing down these wolves in these traps while the rest of us are hanging out with our slippers on at the house, right? And it's a lot of work. Just the legalities behind it alone. They have to check their traps. Is it 72 hours?
Correct.
72 hours.
Yes.
They have to be out there in the backcountry checking these traps. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of gas money. It's a lot of equipment. And like I said, if you guys get on the Idaho for Wildlife Management website.
Foundation for Wildlife Management.
Oh, what did I say? I tell you, I'm not super, dude. I'm a few beers short of a six-pack when the hamster doesn't spin my wheel very fast. So if you jump on the website and you guys sign up and you put the Western Huntsman Podcast in the little comment box where it asks you where you heard about the organization, you will be pooled into a group where by April 4th, by the time the Lewiston banquet rolls around, I'm going to draw a winner and give away a bugle tube from Phelps. So anything you want to add as we wrap this up?
Excellent. I heard you just talking about we're at that juncture where we have to decide whether or not wolves are going to be the only thing that is out there, or all wildlife is going to thrive. And I can't express enough. It's one of the things that I use as a major talking point. Something else that a lot of people who do not want wolves managed don't understand is that when the ungulate population collapses, it's followed by the predator population.
Oh, that's a great point.
It's for the good of all wildlife. And Yellowstone is a prime example that, they tried showing all of these false videos about how the wolves saved Yellowstone, and they forgot to mention about how it wasn't wolves that brought the beavers back. It was the fact that they had a transplant program that brought beavers back for years and years and years. They tried falsifying all kinds of information in that video.
Willows and all this other stuff along the rivers.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that were played into that. But what they failed to mention is this. Their main prey base, the elk population, has collapsed so far that now those wolves are suffering from mange and parvo and diseases, and their own population has collapsed within the park because those that are surviving are dispersing in search of food, which means the wolves that are in Colorado right now probably came from Yellowstone because they already collapsed their prey base there. It's managing wolf numbers is not about saving deer and elk and killing off wolves. Managing wolf numbers is about balancing our ecosystem and keeping everything in a positive light. We worked so hard for 130 years using the North American model of wildlife conservation to maximize our ungulate populations for both consumptive and recreational use, and allowing overpopulations of wolves to collapse all of that, which will in turn collapse their own population, is just not being good stewards of the land.
It's not how you Great points, absolutely. Especially like you said, for the people that they watched that National Geographic thing on the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone, and I mean they even made it sound like the dang outhouses in the campground smelled better due to wolves being there, right? And it's just not the case. And so you've got a lot of knowledge and a lot of input that I think a lot of people are going to benefit from. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
And thank you so much. I'd appreciate it if people want to look us up on Facebook. My phone number and stuff is posted on our website, f4wm.org.
That could be dangerous, giving out your phone.
It is.
Okay, so you're on. Foundation's got Facebook.
Correct.
A YouTube channel.
Yep.
Are you guys on Instagram?
We do have an Instagram page. I'm not real productive at staying up on it, but I'm getting better. Working at that.
Working on that one. And then obviously the f4wm.org.
Correct.
Right? And then I'm going to link all that in the show notes, guys. Jump on there. Membership's at $35, and that will go directly to reimbursing somebody who gets rid of one of these mangy wolves.
Yep.
Thanks a bunch for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Till next time, we'll see you guys later.